Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to you all. My name is Jeanette Camping from Henry Stewart Events, and we are delighted you've joined us for the second in our series of webinars for our Creative Ops community. We are pleased to have 150 professionals from around the world registered for today's event. Avoid collaboration chaos. Pave the way for creativity with smart workflows. At the end of the presentation, we'll take some questions, so please do send them through as the webinar goes on. And also you'll be sent a link to the recording tomorrow. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce Fergus Ash from Screendragon, who you can also hear speak at our upcoming Creative Operations event in San Diego. Well, thanks for joining us today, Fergus.
Thanks, Jeanette. Thank you for that introduction, and hello, everyone, wherever you're dialing in from. So good evening to those in Europe nearly, and good morning or early afternoon to those in the US and Canada or Latin America. I'm delighted you've been able to join us today because we've got a great session prepared with lots, I believe, of practical insights from the operations floor of Geometry USA, which, if you ask me, is actually one of the biggest and busiest operations teams I've experienced on my travels around agencies. So a bit of an introduction to the voices you'll be hearing on the call today. So my name is Fergus Ash, and I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Screendragon. For those of you who've never heard of Screendragon, we're a software company specialized in solutions for the creative and marketing functions at both agencies and also the marketing teams inside enterprises. And what is growing a lot, as we know right now, are in-house agencies on the enterprise side of things. I'm actually an ex-agency guy. I spent about 7 to 8 years in account management functions, and about 13 years ago, a long time ago, I joined Screendragon, and since that point we have been focused on helping agencies and marketing teams leverage technology to help them build brands, basically. And I'm delighted that I've got Greg Hydes from Geometry partnering with me today, and Greg is really the keynote speaker here. He's going to be sharing all his experience and insights, and I'd like to hand it over to him to introduce himself to you all. So over to you, Greg.
Great. Thanks so much, Fergus. Hi, everybody. My name is Greg Hydes. I work, as Fergus just indicated, I work for a company called Geometry Global, which is part of a network, a large network of agencies that support marketing services for clients in that space. I personally work in the creative operations department, and formerly I came from more of a production background and execution. So I've managed production departments, studios, and in there, the creative process that agencies use, as well as the tools that we would use to help those processes work. Some of our clients are big and small. We have clients like Unilever, General Mills, Mondelez that are fairly large, and then we've got smaller clients that have smaller product ranges, but all of them have different types of needs. Some need just simple creative point of sale tactics delivered in store, while others need full shopper marketing programs, from strategy and insights to display work, digital, social media, all the different types of marketing services that may be complete and provide a full host of deliverables to drive a program. So that's kind of what our clients look like. But no matter what, we all kind of share the same goal, and that is to drive market share and profitability. And from the agency side, we have to deliver that with brilliant creative. Our creative needs to be supported by great insights as well, and we have to do it in the most efficient way possible. Obviously, everyone has profits in mind and margin, but we can't let that impact the product. And so it's important, it's extremely important that we work in a very efficient manner in order for us to deliver on that promise. Our approach is always guided by insights here as well. We have strategy departments that help us determine what exactly we want to say and to whom. And similarly, in this process, we leaned on insights as well. So multidisciplinary, that would really be us. We're multi-agency, and we have a lot of different disciplines coming together to help support the idea, and that's who we are. Collaboration, yeah, that's something that we definitely need. We need and can always do better, and so that was an area that we were exploring in order to produce, higher revenues and profits, and who doesn't want that, right? Okay. So now with that in mind, we look at generally like how are we structured? What are we now? And what do we need to become in order to meet that goal? And so we had to do a little bit of soul searching first. And in that process, we determined that we're a multi-agency team. We're positioned across North America. And in each of those offices, we have multiple locations. Some people sit on site, some people work out of their homes, some work in independent offices, some work on client location. Across all of those companies, we've got a ton of different disciplines that are supporting them: creative, strategy, planning, social, media. We have a whole host of different disciplines that are engaged at different times as well. And then with each of those processes or each of those disciplines, we have a unique process, how those things work, how do we engage them? And then the systems that go along with that, the tools that they're being used or not being used, and the documents that we use to relay information back and forth, and ultimately the equipment that or hardware that we're using to support all those systems. And it becomes a lot. Obviously, as you can imagine, if you're in an environment like that, even if you're in an environment that's not multi-agency, you would see something very similar to that. You have challenging dynamics that continue to grow and impact how we work. Now, when you look at that from a client perspective, we're dealing with 7 agencies that support any given client at one time. We're working across 8 locations for a single client as well, and 300 plus employees that are all engaged in that process, bringing us to some 2,700 projects in a year for a single client, let alone for multiple clients. And at the agency, we've got 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 clients that we're dealing with. So we have a lot of people and a lot of information that's moving around, and what appeared to be a relatively complex pattern. So the problem that we identified is pretty simple. The complexities that are part of that system, that snapshot of the way we work, affects how we operate and how we communicate. And that could very well impact our creative product. So we need to be very careful about how we move forward. So our challenge that we saw was that we needed to collapse the complexities so that we can operate more collaboratively and more intuitively. And to do that, we really needed to figure out how to work collectively so we can focus on what we're supposed to be doing. And in the agency world, creative is king. That is our primary deliverable. This is what we're supposed to be doing. Everything has to feed in and support that so that the creative is excellent. Across 7 agencies, we have plenty of processes. Each agency has its own, each process has its own process and its own people. We needed to look at that differently though. We needed to look at a process that simplified how we work together and allowed space for the unique differences that each discipline had to thrive and to boost the creative product. Okay, well, when we look at that, we can see the road ahead. And in there, we can see that definitely we need a new process. We have to look at how those things all layer up. We had to look at how responsibilities were defined and who owned what part across multiple companies, not just within a single company. We needed to look at simple ways to draw the right people in at the right times as well, so that we can draw in specialty disciplines without being wasteful and without overburdening a project or a team or creating a confusing way of engaging different teams. It had to be clear and it had to be simple. And then in the end, we really needed to develop tools that would support all of the process that we just created. Okay.
Greg, I'm going to give you a breather before you to take a drink before you get into the next chapter to call out some things, because Greg is going to go deeper and deeper now, and that's kind of setting the scene. So those of you who like to ask questions, of which I hope there are many, the toolbar that you're probably seeing on screen, the GoToMeeting, that's what you can use. And there is a questions functionality there. And I think anybody who's attended a webinar before, the best webinars are the ones where there's the most engagement and the most questions coming in, because that makes it more interesting for Greg and myself. So please do use it, pose the questions, and I will try to weave it in at the appropriate parts of the presentation. But I'm sure as Greg moves forward here, hopefully he'll trigger lots of different questions around lots of different topics.
Yep, thank you, Greg, for that.
Back to you.
All right, thank you. Okay, so we've kind of looked introspectively, and we have a feeling for what it is that we need to do, and now it's time to start to do that. Okay, so the first thing we start to look at is learning about each of our processes and how they drive great work. What's the difference between each of those? And from there, we look at the terminology that each of these processes utilized, and we had to find commonalities. Which terms were really close and similar? Which terms were really unique and needed to be defined differently? We needed to create a single language that we can all use to communicate across all of our different companies, so that we can work together, and more so even later, so that, as you'll see, so that we can report on those common terms in an effective manner. And when you have all of that information redefined and simplified, now we need a place to put it, right? In agency world, we create a lot of forms. Everything comes in a brief or in a contact report, and it's shared amongst teams, it's shared with our clients. And so we needed a common way in order to transfer information from one person to another, from one department to another, from one team to another team, and location to another location. So forms are really important, and we had one for everything. I mean, there were dozens of forms even within a single company, let alone across all of our companies. And so that had to be unified. And then we had to look at really who's the right person at each of those specialties that owns the information, the subject matter expert, the person that intersects with two different disciplines and understands them both, that can be a champion in that space. And how do they inform the details that are moving around, and how can they direct their teams and other teams and bring information back in a way that the rest can utilize. So then we looked finally, or not finally, but at the end of that process, we kind of looked at, we have all of these points of intersection, all these people that are real specialty experts, and we had to figure out who can be the owner of that. Is there a way for us to identify a single person or set of people that can bring the project from the very beginning through all of these steps and all of these different disciplines, and guide it to the end in keeping information accurate and current, and understands all of the different processes. And with that, we have a way of working. We have our new process, our new understanding of how the agency should work, and how we would work together in a collaborative way, and people to own that. And that was really important for us to figure out.
So Greg, first question in, and it's one actually that I posed to you in discussing the webinar content. So you've covered all the ground in thinking about how you set yourselves up as a new entity that previously was working as separate companies. The question here is about timing. How long did it take you to go through this process of examining everything, evaluating, and then putting in place these new centralized practices?
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, when you're dealing with lots of people and you're dealing with lots of different disciplines, you've got to find the right folks first that can help and live and be part of the process throughout, from the very beginning to the very end. There's a lot of investigation and discovery that has to happen, where you learn about each discipline. It's not just getting an understanding of what it looks like on paper, you know, a RACI or a step-by-step. You really have to understand what's being done in each of the steps for each of the different processes in order for you to be able to decipher between what the difference is between it and another that may be happening in a completely different but adjacent process. And so if you want to be able to merge them, you have to do that. And so it took us about 6 months to get through a good, thorough understanding across the board, not just taking in the information, but creating a team that would be part of that discovery process and having all of us understand and collapse that information into something that we thought could work. Now, after that, after the first 6 months of really kind of digging in deep and getting it figured out, it really comes down to next. It never ends. The change that happens and the constant evolution is just part of working in this environment now. Every day there's new tools coming out, and every day there are new services and new dynamics in the marketplace that we have to adjust to. So we're constantly evolving, and that plays a role too in later. And when you're getting into decisions about how to do it and what tools you use to do it, you need to be able to be flexible and nimble and able to adjust. So it's an ongoing thing, you know, but it starts with some digging in deep, and then it definitely moves on to an ongoing evaluation. And I think that's what the operation team really owns.
So there's questions coming in, Greg, that are related to some of the later slides about change management. So that's good. That's coming up for those of you sending in the change management questions. We're coming to that.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Yep. Great foreshadowing. Okay, so previously, you know, in the situation that we were in prior, we worked independently. Some would call silos. Each discipline had its own process and its own team and its own way of being engaged. And now we're looking and positioning ourselves to work more collaboratively. And what does that do? It creates some synchronicity across all of our systems. We then can migrate from independent processes to one process, one way of working that combines a series of complex parts into a single way of working smoothly and efficiently. It's a unified team that's surrounded by opportunities to collaborate through the creative process, creative development process. And that's really important because one of our challenges was certainly, when do we bring the people in? As I mentioned earlier, that's a big struggle. You know, you can't just bring everybody in every single time. You have to understand the project in order to know when and who needs to be part of each project. Okay, so we did all the heavy lifting, right? We figured this all out. We've drafted a new way of working. Everyone's high-fiving. We're, you know, drinks around, right? Great job, high fives. But not yet. Nope, not yet. We have a long way to go. In fact, we still have, we have to enact this. We have to operationalize the process, essentially, is what has to happen next. And so we've figured out this process, this complex process, which is now simplified and streamlined. And but now it's time to really figure out how do we do that. So tools and systems are certainly playing a big role in getting that process going. Well, as we looked at our tools and process, it's really easy to make a big mistake here. You don't want to fall trap to modifying your process to fit the tool. That does not work. Your process is your process. That has to be smart and intuitive, and you have to have tools that support it and that don't drive it. And oftentimes you look at a tool and you're like, well, it does this really great, so why don't we just do that in our process too? We'll just modify. And that's where you run into problems. That's where things become too complex, and you don't want to fall into that trap. So as we looked at our situation, what kind of systems and tools were we utilizing? Well, we had lots of different ways to communicate, and we had tons of places to store information, you know, and no less in different places, some locally and some cloud-based and some hosted from our internal servers. We also had several different places where we collected data and shared that information. So images and documents and templates and movies and links to things. All of that information needed to be centralized because it was all fragmented, and nobody really knew where to find it. And each asset that we had a different location to store it. So we had localized servers in every office that were needed, and those were really, they have an intended purpose, but they were being used for the wrong purposes. And then we also had, everyone had their own, each company had its own file transfer solution. We need to send files out to partners, and so we weren't unified in that way either. And therefore, all of these things really created a lot of complexity and scattered data across all of the systems. And when it's scattered, you really don't know where to go to get it. Where's the most current version? What's the most reliable version? Even if you're going to where you believe it's the most reliable version, you have uncertainty associated with it. So we had to look at that. We had to figure out what the right way was at addressing that. Each system was localized on top of it. Therefore, we had duplicative content. If it was in a server in New York and it was on a server in Chicago, the only way to know whether one was accurate and the other one was not was to look at the modification dates. Behind every file, there was someone else placing it there too. So you have labor associated with that. All the time wasted on storing things on your hard drive, on a local drive, on a cloud drive, all of that builds up and creates a lot of inefficiency and a lot of inaccuracy to compound it. And so we needed to move to something that was more centralized, a single location where we can store information, and that was really important. Our challenge with communication was pretty simple. We had too many ways to communicate. We had people sending files 10 different ways. Clients had a tool, account had a tool, sometimes several tools. They had one for their partners, they'd have one for their clients, they had one for internal use. They had a place where they stored style guides or creative guides for themselves, and some for the field teams, and some for internal use again. And it became very messy and very time consuming to keep it up to date. And recipients really had to compare communications. If they would receive, they could receive an email with client direction, they could receive a message with client direction, they could get a text message, they could get a chat. And so all of these different ways of getting information, or it could be uploaded to a server and being told where the link is, all of that created a lot of chaos. And so we needed to, again, simplify. We need to simplify this. We needed to rid ourselves of all of that confusion by making it more streamlined. So how do we fix that? Well, we reduced to 3. We gave each tool a very specific purpose as well. We gave one to focus on formal client communications across the team, and we used email for that. And that was restricted. No more announcements, no more project-specific information, because we had a place for those things. We created a second tool, more of a messaging tool, that we used for general announcements. So new employees, new brands, new product innovations, as well as a place where we can collaborate and share ideas, share and store photos, things like that. We really tried to focus on the collaboration part being in its own system, and that was a messaging system that we launched internally for, it's cloud-based, but it was internally that we used for that. And we had channels where we can focus on different content, and then we had direct messaging within it where we're able to speak to people directly and individually. And that pulled a lot of data out of email, huge amounts, because email became so cluttered because it was a catch-all. And so we were able to focus all of that information into spaces where people can join and participate. And then lastly, we really had to focus on where do we put project-specific details? Where does that go? It really should live with the project. If you're going to go to a project, you should be able to find everything about that project in that place and not have to go search in 3 different communication channels in order to get the most current information. So we defined the 3 we wanted, we gave them a very specific purpose, and we launched them that way. And we policed it, making sure that everyone was following that. Okay, so communication kind of handled, we looked then at asset management. Assets, really document management. Where do we do this? Currently, we're looking at assets that were hosted in several different locations. There were dams. We had dams. Our clients had dams. Our clients had dams. Our clients had multiple dams. one for one specific type of asset, one for another, some that worked in certain ways with the end product and where it was being delivered and for tracking. And so there were so many different places where assets lived that we really needed to figure out a way where we could rely on something as a group of companies that housed everything that we needed to work accurately on a daily basis. Those systems also had restricted asset types. And so we really needed to figure out a place that had a purpose, that was able to handle several different types of documents, had security. And then there were also a whole host of assets that really didn't have a home. And we needed to find a place for those too, because those were being stored locally as well and independently. And so we needed to bring all of that together. And so when we looked at the fix for our document management, we had to find a place that was central. So ideally, that would be a cloud-based solution. It needed to have integrations, which was something really important to us because we wanted to be able to say that if I'm working in a given application, I need access to assets. I want to be able to link to that. I want to be able to pull from there or get access to it very quickly and very easily. It has to be a simple solution that can identify assets fast. We needed one place as well so that everyone knew where to go and so that every asset could be achieved. If they were looking for an insight or a PowerPoint or a reference to completed projects or visuals of what we've completed in store or live assets, images of products, videos of project, commercials that are running, press releases, anything that we needed to have it in one place so that when we went looking for something about a brand and to work on that brand, everything lived there, one place, and it needed to be self-serve, and that's really important. Once we put an asset up there, the last thing you want is for everyone to take the asset and then give it to someone else to go do something else with it to give it back to them. If it's something that's simple enough that they can manage themselves, then the system should be able to provide for that. Converting an image from one file type to another file type is key. Making it a different size is key. Downloading it and sharing it, sharing links to assets so that other people don't have to find them and share them. These were all things that we were doing badly before, and with the new system that we launched, we were able to consolidate it and make it simple. And that gives time back to people tenfold. No longer are they waiting for a response from someone who manages a system. No longer are they struggling to find assets that are needed for simple executions and simple projects. And further, everyone can go up and find the assets that they need to utilize.
Greg, there's a question here before you move into project management, and
Yeah.
I think you might as well answer it later one-to-one with people. There's questions about your marketing stack, as in what exactly you use for communications, messaging, for group comms, for email, etc. So maybe we come to that at the end. Otherwise, we can you can follow up directly with some of the people asking for it as well about the different types of applications you've combined within Geometry.
Yeah. For one, I mean, it's a creative agency, so we, like many, are Microsoft Office and Adobe applications. That's essentially what we utilize for the bulk of the work that we're doing from a print and creative perspective. In terms of communications, I mean, obviously there are more systems in there because we do more things than that. There are feeder disciplines that help in the creative development process. Obviously, we do video editing, we do CGI and image development, we do videos and audio editing too. So there's tools that are all within there that we're utilizing, and certainly they depend a lot on what type of deliverable that we're doing. But we have a whole host of different systems, and we have multiple tools in some cases. Like if we're doing something that's just a real quick idea board, then we'll use one tool, and when we're doing a final version of it, we might utilize a different tool, just for efficiency's sake. So there's a lot of different ways to approach a project. So from an application perspective, in terms of the creative development, those are the tools that we basically use. From
I think you'll be getting to it I think if you get into it in the change management part as well, I know you've mentioned the combination of the email and the Slack for informality or that sort of group. So I think for the people asking, Greg will cover some of those other apps later on.
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning that. I don't believe I said Slack, but Slack is the messaging tool that we're currently using. And that gave us a lot of flexibility in terms of sharing imagery and files, as well as communicating in groups and individually, and reporting and looking across what it is we're using. And it has a lot of integrations too that allows us to connect with other tools, so we can get feeds and pay attention to who's being communicated with. So it all works together. So Slack, and then Outlook is our email tool. And then as I get into the project management fix, we'll talk about Screendragon as a project management tool as well. Okay, so when we looked at the project management challenge that we were facing, again, we had a lot of fragmentation. We had, everything was in analog form too. Briefs were written in Word documents, some were in Excel documents, some were in PDF, interactive PDF documents. They were of every size and shape you can imagine. And so when we looked at the projects that were coming in, they were coming in an analog form that had to be stored and processed and printed and duplicated and shared out with the teams. And so in all of the project information that was associated with every job lived within those. So it became a time challenge and a labor challenge to make sure that those were managed, up to date, and shared out within a specific communications channel so that everyone was aware. So we had to figure out really how to do that better because it was decentralized. We also had to look at how we managed the workload, who was assigned to what. Hot sheets, right? Everybody has hot sheets. Some people, you have individual task lists. Other groups have collective team hot sheets where they can see what they've assigned. And we had that same challenge here. We had departments that were running their own. We had teams that ran them for a whole client engagement. Lots of entry of data, lots of upkeep of data, and lots of sharing of that data. And therefore, again, across multiple data point entries, we had issues with the information being accurate. On busy days, maybe those sheets weren't kept up to date quite as frequently as they should have been, and therefore that leads to confusion and potentially missed deadlines. And so we had to be really, really intentional about how and what information we wanted to store and where we wanted to store that. And so when we looked at solutions for project management, again, we were looking at accessibility. Again, we work across multiple locations. This solution had to be able to keep track of the versions that we're working on, and it had to be able to do more things than just one. Excel is great, and even Excel in the cloud is great, right? Because it's someplace where everybody can go and see the information, but it's really limited in terms of what you can do with it. And once you've made updates, you lose that information. And in some cases, you can't store any other information there other than what you could type into a field. And so it's very limiting, and it kind of forces you outside of that space to keep track of other bits of information. And so we had to find a tool that was multifunctional, and it had to be flexible. If we couldn't modify it on the fly to suit our needs, as our needs change, then it would become a paperweight, essentially. It wouldn't serve us going forward. So it had to be simple, it had to be customizable, and we had to be able to do some things with it that allowed us to streamline some of the ways we work, maybe automate some of the processes that we were doing manually. And obviously it needed to be secure. Okay, so when we stumbled onto Screendragon and we started to evaluate the functionality of the tool, it started to line up pretty well with our needs. It's cloud-based, right? So anybody can get to it, which gives us and solves the problem of everything being single point of entry and centralized and faster to get to. It provided a solution in terms of document control. So we could keep track of versions as a project was modified and edited. It kept track of that. We can go back and look at previous versions within the system, which is something that we had a hard time with before. Even with analog documents, we'd have to say version 1, version 2, version 3, open them up separately to look at them, whereas we were able to just toggle between them within Screendragon. And plus, it gave us a place where we can store everything. Every bit of information about the project could live inside a project. It had forms that we could create that matched and were aligned with the documents that we created, the forms that we created up front in our process. And when we simplified our form down to 1 or 2, we were able to create that in Screendragon so that all of that information can be entered. And then we can secure that information too. We could give certain groups of people access to editing that detail while others really only needed to see it. And then back to the printing part, everyone had analog forms before, and I think one of the great challenges that anybody who's dealt with a creative department before could attest to is that creative likes things to be nice looking, and they also like to have something tangible to hold in their hands every now and again. They want to be able to hold it and look at it and read it, and so we have the ability to do that here as well. So we were able to centralize all of our information. We were able to track it. We were able to edit it and share it out with the teams, and that was a big plus. Okay, so now that we've got all this information stored in one place, we really had to look at how can we automate? What parts can we automate? And are they easy to make? Yeah, they're so easy to make. It's not too unlike any workflow that you might create. You start somewhere and you end somewhere. And we were able to create workflows for just about anything, and they could be as complex as we wanted. We have workflows for briefs. When you create a brief and you need input from other people, it flows to another person. That person edits the forms, and then they move it along to another person, or they approve it and review it. And so we're able to actually automate detail entry as well and the approval of that detail, as well as other systems, approvals of a brief, approval of an estimate. We can create an estimate in the system and then route it to finance and legal for approval before it goes off for a client signature. And so these things became streamlined. Instead of manually forwarding and chasing after everything, they were automatically pulling people in when it was their turn to tackle that next task. And we were able to automate our creative review cycle, putting information into the system, routing creative, having annotations apply to the creative, and then sharing those comments and feedback back with the team for action, or going through and having the project approved without any changes. So we're able to actually automate all these systems, and it freed up a lot of time in chasing and moving things to the next step and manually printing and routing and scanning and forwarding and all that we were doing before. It all went away because we were able to put it in one place. And even people that that weren't part of a workflow were able to go in and comment as well. So it wasn't restricted to specific people. It was a very open and very collaborative environment. We even were able to automate simple things like time off requests. And that all worked its way into a master resource calendar so we can see what was going on across the system. Tasks within every project, we can give different components to different people, and we can do it in a number of different ways. I can either assign a task manually, I can have tasks automatically generated from other entries and assign them to people and give them time parameters and instruction, and then we can monitor the status of those projects as they move forward to completion. And all of that information ends up in hot sheets and part of a resource planner, which is really the next part. Once you've got projects tasked to everybody, you really kind of need to know, where am I? Who has what? How many things are going on in my department at this time? How do I reprioritize the work? And through hot sheets and the resource planner within Screendragon, we were able to do that. We were able to assign projects to people, give it an amount of time through those tasks, and then they could then see all the different projects that they've been assigned. Department heads could look at how everyone was being resourced across all of the different projects, who was overburned and who was underutilized, so that they can move projects from one to the other. And then lastly, very drag and drop environment. If I had too many tasks for one person, I could just slide it over to another person within the calendar view and give it to somebody else. So great reporting. Visibility as well to all of our project lists. So if you needed to see, which we do, how do our projects look, and how are they trending right now in terms of when are they due? We can manage that visibly through conditional formatting as well within our project list and see how things are approaching deadlines. And the resource planning here, I apologize, I kind of jumped ahead on that, I got excited. So resource planning is kind of a big deal. Be able to see everybody in one screen and how they're being utilized is a very big part of keeping us sane day to day. And then and all of this is linked, and that's the beauty of it. And reporting and metrics is the greatest testament to that. When we're all done entering all of this data into one place, all of that data is now reportable, and it's all able to be leveraged. So I don't have to go and enter it somewhere else or manage it someplace else. I don't have to ask anybody else to pull a report. I can go in and just look at it. I could look at it at the project level, as this would indicate. I could look at staff allocations across a whole resource planner. I can see my burn on a specific project. So what have I estimated on this project? And what have I tasked? So really, what are we looking at in terms of total tasks? And then how much burn time has been applied? And then I can look even more individually into the detail and see who did what, who overburned, who overclocked time or is being overutilized and who isn't. You know, is it assigned to the wrong person? Is it a higher hourly rate that's impacting the burn or what? But I'm able to look at that by project, and I'm able to look at that on a larger scale as well across teams and client groups. I could look at project analysis for year end. So if I needed to see how many projects we did or how many projects we did for a certain brand or a certain level or with a certain person, who has how many projects on their plate at any given time, I could pull reports that analyze that information very easily, again, because I've entered it. Once you've entered it once, it can be reported on. And workload distribution, which I've hit a few times here.
Greg, I'll give you a bit of a breather there because a question came in, and it's one that I can probably answer. The question is, I don't think you're using it, but does Screendragon integrate with Jira? The simple answer is yes. Right now, I don't believe Geometry are using that. The key for Geometry, correct me if I'm wrong, or Greg, is we integrate with the Geometry's SAP system to pull in finance data and timesheet data. That's the key integration, correct, Greg?
For Geometry, that is our key integration. Some of our partners that we work with use Jira and have integrated into our Screendragon instances as well, so that project information can transfer back and forth. So you don't have duplicated entry. If we create a project on Screendragon and it's integrated with their Jira instance, it pulls the project information over into Jira so that information can be managed there. And for our instance, we have it set up in a certain way where it's only pulling certain parts of the data, not all of the data. And so within each of the individual systems, they're able to do their full reporting based on the features that are developed. But definitely, we're able to share that information across the two.
Now, so there's been a couple of questions coming in with regard to change management. Hopefully, you'll knock them all off here.
Okay.
Greg, I think it's your last chapter as well. How did you realize this?
Yeah. This is a tricky one, right? So in change management, you really have two types of people that you're going to be addressing: the late adopters and the early adopters. Late adopters just they tend to be set in certain ways. They maybe are technology adverse a little bit. They're not unwilling to change. They're just a little bit slower to change, and so they need to be approached in a different way. And so instead of creating completely different training processes for these two different types of people, you can leverage one against the other. So early adopters are simple. They love technology, they gravitate to it, they take to it on their own, they explore freely, and they tend to learn through trial. And so those folks are the team members that you're going to want to grab onto first. And when I described earlier that you want a group of key individual subject matter experts that are going to feed in, similarly, whenever you're launching something of a technology like this, you're going to want to make sure you have a group of people that are your super users that really you can lean on. And they then can be the first line of defense across all of the different teams. They are then able to train and answer questions. And so with that, if you can pull in your early adopters first and get them to be super users, now you can approach everyone else collectively in a single way. You have personalized trainings that need to happen, which are more by groups, and then you can do refreshers, which we did. We did sort of a bi-monthly refresher training, which was only 30 minutes, and it was an open forum, and people can come in and they can ask whatever question that they wanted, and we would address it. They can even ask for something to be customized for them, and we would address it, but it was only a short period of time. And what you end up finding is that there are some people that really gravitate to that, and other people just want documents. They want to have access to training information. And there's a couple ways to provide that. You can provide full decks of how the entire system works, or you can create one-pagers, like little quick tips, things of how to do this, how to do that, how to create a new job, how to submit an estimate, how workflow works, how to create a report, how to upload a file, how to annotate on a file, all these little things, these small little individual tasks that people get hung up on. You can create little trainings for that. That could be a print training, it could be like a little PDF document, which we posted. And we used actually a Slack channel, which was a knowledge base for Screendragon. And so we encouraged everyone to join it, and they can ask questions in that forum as well. And anyone that was in the forum could help answer the question. And what's really cool about that is that in the beginning, it was super users, it was administrators, and then super users started to answer questions. And then other users just start to answer questions, and suddenly everybody's answering everyone's question. And if they don't know the answer to it, there's someone in there as well that can correct it or provide an answer. Or if it's too big and it's something that the system can't do, we see it and we can address it and we can customize to develop it. And so these different ways of approaching it are all really nice, and they help push out the information to the team. So we did that, and that helped get everybody trained, and we did it in a record time. Part of that pre-launch success really is focused on, again, we solicited inputs from various different places, from all the different teams, so we understood what we were building. We kept it simple and nimble. We don't overcomplicate or over-engineer anything. It doesn't need to be super complex. It just needs to be, it has to touch on the points, because people still like to do some things manually, but the bulk of the information, the part that really streamlines it, is where information goes, so that they all have a place that they can rely on. Then we need to pressure test it, make sure that everyone that's in the super user group understands it, can work it, they poked holes in it, and it's functioning, and that doesn't take a long time either. And then we need to train in homogeneous groups, and the biggest reason for that is if you're training creatives feel comfortable asking creative questions. If you train creatives and finance people together, no one's going to ask any questions because they don't want to interrupt the discussion about the other group's questions, right? So you end up alienating questions. You want to encourage questions. You want this process to be collaborative in a training perspective. So do that, and that works really well too. Opening up forums, again, for refresher trainings are key, and then addressing Q&As through tips and tip sheet distributions. And what we had tip of the day, we would post a tip every day of something new or based on a question that we received, and that was really successful, and people can go back and refer to it later by searching. So that was the beauty of all of that pre-launch. And then you move into launch. So the keys to a live launch, obviously, when you finally get to that point where you're ready to move over, you're going to have to migrate data, and you just want to migrate the relevant data, because you can't go backwards too far. And you don't need to put everything in there backwards. You just need to have some bits of information. So identify what that is. If it's project and type of project or brand or timing, whatever it might be, migrate that key bit of information first, then get everything that's active in place so that when you turn it on, people have some place to find the detail. And then you start to roll out in stages. And one of the things that we found was we actually launched one part of Screendragon and one part of our asset management system first. We used a small part that introduced people to just a glimpse of what the system does. And what it did was it created some dependence, well, some competency really, and then dependency on it. So when we showed them, like for example, we showed them the asset review tool. In order to get to an asset review tool, you have to have certain things in place. You have to be able to enter a project, you have to be able to enter project details, you have to be able to route it, create workflows. And so while all of that seems really complicated, we did it for the sole purpose of routing creative. And that brought everybody into the system from all departments, and they all got to look at it, and they all got to participate in it and actually build a skill set in doing it, so that when we turned on everything else, most of the key practices were already in place. They knew how to access, they knew how to create new, they knew how to task and how to review data and sort jobs and resource. I mean, all these things were exposed to them in little bits. So it actually built a ton of competency, which helped us to launch more complicated things more quickly. And then the next thing is really tearing the Band-Aid off. You can't dance around this. When it's time to cut over, you got to cut over. You got to disable old systems so that there's no way that folks can go back, because if they're given the choice, they're not going to migrate. And so you have to force them through and force them in, which is why you have to be prepared. And so when you've got that set up, then you can move into training and chat rooms and tips, video tips, screen recordings of how to do things, and knowledge base. And all of those things really do support it. From that point on, you just continue to update. As you have new things, you continue to work on them, and you launch them the exact same way. Train the teams that are going to be utilizing it, post training information into central locations so teams know how to get to it and find it.
So did you take, Greg, a cold turkey approach to other applications? Did you really switch them off and have people coming and arguing with you at your desk?
Oh, well, they knew. I mean, we didn't surprise them with this. They knew we were migrating. They knew certain things were migrating. And when we finally disabled other systems, they understood that that was coming. And so they had an opportunity to move information out. And we also ensured that all the information that was stored somewhere else was going to be migrated over. And yeah, in some cases, you can't turn off Excel. If somebody has an Excel hot sheet and they're running it locally, no, I can't disable that. I can disable other systems that maybe we were hosting. But what ends up happening is we brought the folks that owned the hot sheets, we created a hot sheet that would replace all of the other hot sheets. And then we started to share that central location for that information out. And what it ends up doing is it ends up forcing people back to the middle where the information is stored. If all of the current and accurate information is stored within one place, then that means that's the most reliable hot sheet. And when you have reliability, then you have people that are committed to utilizing it. And so that's kind of how we address that.
So Greg, we haven't got a lot of time left, so I'm going to have to be selective in the questions. I'm going to give you one now. So how far did you go in replacing paper-based briefs, creative briefs, or other briefs?
We replaced every brief that we had except for one. And the one brief that we were filling out that we couldn't replace was actually not our brief. It was a vendor brief. It was a partner that we utilized that had a very specific way of, they wanted to receive information. It was a print broker, and they really needed information provided to them one way. And we tried to we could build a form that mirrored it, that stored all that same information. However, the challenge that we faced was that we couldn't let them, we didn't want them into the system because we couldn't secure them. And the other challenge that we had was that the export from our system to their system was not working, partly because the tools that they were using were a little bit outdated. So that was one situation, but that was okay because we were able to actually continue managing it with an external firm. And we're still working on getting that resolved, but that was the one. But everything else we did, we converted.
Okay, so there's a good segue here then to the final question, and we'll leave the money question to the last question. It's about efficiency and cost savings. So building on that point of you guys were printing out briefs and all of them and sharing them around the office. Did you see any reduction in your printing costs and your paper costs?
Oh yeah, well I could, in equipment, I could tell you that we've removed 2 out of 5 printers that we had on our floor. 2 full-blown copiers, right? So that the reduction in ticks had gone down enough that we could do that. And those devices are all being shared out now. So that's a huge cost savings in having fewer devices on the floor right away. Not to mention that we don't go through, I imagine we could even reduce that further. We've been doing this now for 4 years, 3 years fully in. And so that's what we've seen in the first 2 years, that reduction alone, a lot less paper going through our offices. Everything's being pushed digitally. So we see a lot of that.
And any other KPIs that you're tracking?
Utilization, and we go through cost savings exercises every single year, and so we do see that we're operating with the need for less talent and better utilization. We were in 140% utilization ranges in the first year, and we're in at 85, 90s with room for us to focus on growth at this point, which is exactly where you want to be. You don't want to be so tapped out that you can't provide your clients with bigger insights and bigger ideas to address some of their challenges. So we find that we're able to be more efficient in the number of people and the types of deliverables that we're able to spend time on.
Okay, I'm afraid we've run out of time, Greg. There's other questions coming in that we'll try and answer as quickly as possible via the text, but I'd love to thank you, Greg. I think everybody will feel from your presentation there that you've lived many a year in the creative trenches and have seen it all happen and have looked at where you can improve things and find efficiencies. And ultimately, I think the last point that you've been making to me through our preparation of this, it's all about the creative work. Whatever the process, you've been saying, we will be evaluated by our customers on how good our deliverable is. Mm-hmm. That's correct, isn't it? Despite everything we say now, the end product is what counts.
Absolutely, because that's what sells. That's what our clients are looking to gain market share and profit margins. And so the creative product is the only way for that, for us to solve that problem for them. So it's really important that we're doing that in the best way we can. And so in doing all of these things, we've really freed people to be as creative as possible and not be bogged down with administrative paperwork and shuffling and overbookings. This has really freed us to focus on the work, and that's the most important part.
Well, thank you, Greg, for sharing all of that and preparing in such a super way for this. I think it was really interesting to hear the story of, I think, the origination of geometry from all these different companies to this one solid core now that is working with clients big and small, in particular your work for Unilever, which is huge in the USA. So thank you for that.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
And thank you, Henry Stewart. Jeanette, I assume you want to come in and say some final words.
Thank you very much, Fergus and Greg. Excellent presentation. Screendragon are also sponsoring our West Coast Creative Ops event, Creative Operations San Diego, which takes place on November the 15th. If you haven't already, you can register in your place now and take advantage of our early bird discount, which ends next Friday. You can find all the details on our website, and we hope to see many of you there. Thanks again. Goodbye.